Thank you for joining us. My name is Barry Erickson, and I'm Community Engagement Coordinator here at Wheaton Public Library. We are delighted to bring you this art demonstration in partnership with the DuPage Art League.
Thank you, Barry. I am Vice President of Activities at the DuPage Art League. The Art League was founded over 60 years ago and is dedicated to promoting and encouraging the visual arts through classes, workshops, gallery exhibits, and public programs such as this one. We are grateful for this demonstration by acclaimed artist Dan Danielson. Dan is a signature member of the internationally recognized Transparent Watercolor Society of America and a winner of their Maurice Pendergrass Award. He is also a signature member, a board member, and the program director of the Illinois Watercolor Society. Dan considers his greatest achievement, however, to be teaching and helping others, discovering the depth of this fascinating medium. He insists that there is nothing the participant can do wrong and that not being afraid to make mistakes is the way to learn and improve through persistence and desire. Thank you so much, Dan, for providing this demonstration for the Wheaton Public Library and the DuPage Art League community.
Hi, I'm Dan Danielson, and thank you to the Wheaton Public Library for inviting me here today to give a little demonstration on watercolor. And thank you, Barry and Sandy, for allowing me here. It's truly a privilege. I've always enjoyed watercolor ever since I was a little guy. I've always enjoyed art. I enjoyed painting. I always wanted to be an artist. And people always ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I always say artist. And they would say, well, what do you really want to be when you grow up? And I'd say, I just want to be an artist. And but I wanted to have a paycheck too. You can't really make a living. It's hard to make a living as an artist. So I went into advertising, became an art director, a creative director. I did that for 40 years, enjoyed that. And then I retired and I thought, well, what am I going to do now? And so then I started watercolor and I started teaching at the DuPage Art League. It's right down the street here in Wheaton. And I've been doing that now for almost 9 years and really enjoying that. My background is advertising and fine arts. Now I'm a true artist now. Watercolor, it's fascinating though. People will say, why watercolor? Watercolor is, some people are a little intimidated by it because it's very dynamic, it's spontaneous, it's fluid, and you don't have a whole lot of control. You control half of it. The other half is controlled by the medium itself. And but once you learn about it, it's really fun. It's kind of scary too. And it's also very relaxing. So I thought what I'd do before I show a demo, do a little demo here. I'll show you a few of my paintings, and let's share a screen here with you. Watercolor is, like I mentioned before, is pretty spontaneous, and it's a little scary sometimes because people say, well, you can't make mistakes. It's not necessarily true. First of all, watercolor, it's amazing because it's really the oldest medium. It goes back 500 years. Michelangelo used watercolor in Sistine Chapel. He took pigment and water and a binder, and he painted into fresco, actually into wet plaster. And essentially, it was watercolor into wet plaster. 4,000 years ago, the pyramids, what did they use? They used watercolor, painted on the inside of tombs and different shrines that they had. Cave paintings, over 36,000 years ago, in the days of cave painting, that's what they use. As a matter of fact, some of the pigments that they used back then, we're still using today, the burnt umbers and the different types of paints that are made from just ground up rocks. That's what they did. And one of the assignments that we do, one of the lessons we do in my class is we actually paint a cave painting just to get a feel of how it was done back then. being an artist is basically, it's not so much just learning the craft of painting, it's about seeing and being able to see shapes and think and interpret reality. So we don't really paint exactly what we see. We're actually capturing the mood, we're capturing the emotion, we're capturing what we feel, not necessarily reality, but it's looking at something and capturing the texture, the light, the shadow, contrast, and taking a look at what we see as an artist, not necessarily as a camera would see reality. We interpret reality. We don't let reality get in the way of artistic way of thinking. So our interpretation of reality is basically kind of the direction that we go, and we're inspired by nature. We get a lot of our inspiration from nature. It can be small, it can be large, it can be, we're part of it too. So whatever we do is a big part of how nature interacts with us. We become part of, in watercolor, we see reality, we interpret it, and we could allow the medium to take over. Paint the sky above, looking at nature, looking at things below us, see the small things. Be inspired, be the ordinary. What people will say, well, what are we going to paint? Well, paint anything, look around. That's what being an artist is be able to see and look and interpret. So the type of watercolor that I like to do, it's pretty bold, and it's loose and it's fluid. It's not real tight. It's far from being detailed. It's really a way of loosening up a little bit. And it's actually relaxing. It can be a little scary too sometimes, but we get out of our comfort zone. It's kind of fun. All righty, so today I thought we would do a lesson in one of the basics of fundamentals of watercolor, and that is allowing color to mingle and mix on its own. And I'm going to start out with this photo here. Very colorful photo. It really is kind of a good lesson in how to let the medium do its own thing as far as being a partner. Like I mentioned before, it's a partnership, you and the medium. So where do we start? I'm looking at it, I'm looking at the big shapes. The first thing we look at, big shapes, and we paint with big brushes. All the brushes I have today are really big brushes. I do have some small ones, but that's for later on. At the beginning, we'll start out with taking, let's see, taking some, start with the greens. I'm going to start at the top and work down. And you notice I'll paint quickly. Watercolor really is meant to be painted really, really fast. So I'm just kind of mixing a little of a permanent green, and I pick up a little lemon yellow, put that in there, just a little bit. Mix your own colors. And let's see, big brush. I'm going to start at the top here and just kind of let this flow, let the water flow down a little bit. Some yellows in here. And a little green here. Boom, push that down there. A lot of water, so it's nice and fluid. All kinds of greens over here. that. And like I mentioned before, that there's really nothing you can do wrong. It takes a little confidence to do that, but just trying it, that's the most important thing. Just picking up your brush, push it down. Push down on the brush. If it splatters around, that's okay. That's better yet. Some yellows in here, a little bit of a gamboge in here. Yeah. Okay, so now I'm putting in some lemon yellow in here. Nice bright colors. I mean, this is, again, our inspiration comes from nature. And you don't need to change nature, because nature has the beauty of the way things have naturally been designed. And I'm looking at this and just kind of coming in with some other greens over here now. Just kind of let the color flow in together, pushing down, big brush, pushing down with the big brush, and work fast. You know, you work fast. Boom, push down like that, coming around. Notice there's like paint is like splattering around. That's okay. That's okay. It gives it liveliness too. It gives it some really neat effects. And sometimes that's kind of a scary thing too. You think, oh my gosh, look at it splattering around. That's all right. That's okay. It's meant to be the style that I always like. It's meant to be bold and loose too, you know. And it's quickly, and anybody could learn how to paint like this, but we have to give ourselves permission to make mistakes. Sometimes as we get a little older, we turn into grown-ups, you know, we kind of lose that playfulness that we had when we were kids, you know. And it's kind of fun to be able to get back to that, just to have fun with it. So I'm kind of picking up some yellow over here on the beak area. Whoops, like that. Kind of fun coming down. That. Sound effects are very important. You know, make the sound effects. It's almost like you ought to hear me when I'm doing a train locomotive. It's like, whoa, like that. And then, well, what you can do while it's still wet, you kind of make in here. Oh, this basically all I'm doing, I have a palette knife here, and I'm scratching in to the wet pigment, give it a little texture into the feathery area. And you have to do it while it's still damp. If it dries, you can't do that. So you can actually use the edge of a credit card or anything like that. It doesn't have to be a knife. You don't want to cut the paper, though. You don't want to cut the paper. You just want to just move the pigment to the side. Kind of just, I still have the big brush, you know, but if you can control this big brush, you get some nice finer points too. Now, I'm not copying this photo. It's my interpretation of it. And if it doesn't exactly look like the photo, that's okay. That's okay. It's kind of fun just to try different ways of doing it too. I sketched it onto this watercolor paper. I did a little line drawing, a very light line drawing on the paper itself, just kind of a guideline as far as just kind of respecting nature. You want to, again, you look at nature and you want to make sure. In this case, this parrot looks a certain way. It's been designed by nature, so to speak, and we want to respect it. So I just follow that overall look. And I'm kind of just mixing like a burnt umber here, burnt umber and phthalo blue. Gives me a really deep, rich color in here and down. And watercolor really is about mixing the ratio between the amount of pigment and the amount of water that you use. If you use too much water, it's going to dry a little lighter and it's going to look too washed out. And if you use too much pigment, it starts looking opaque, and it starts looking like a pastel drawing almost, and doesn't have that glowing effect that a watercolor has. Watercolor is meant to be transparent. Now I'm going to reach over and grab another big brush, but a round brush. Up to this point, I've been using a flat brush, but now I've picked up a nice big fat round brush. A cerulean blue, picking up a cerulean blue here.
Is there a brand of brushes that you prefer?
Well, you know what? I like all kinds of brushes. Brushes are, there's all kinds of brushes. The most important thing is a good quality brush. Doesn't have to be expensive, but just so that they're large and you feel comfortable with. These are basically natural hair brushes, meaning made out of squirrel, probably squirrel, and I have a goat hair brush here and different natural hair brushes. Some sable brushes have gotten expensive, but if you're going to buy, you got to make sure that you get brushes that are are professional grade, not the cheaper ones. that go. I'm just kind of, notice I started out with the big areas first, and I'm kind of working down to the smaller areas. Here again, I'm taking my palette knife and just kind of putting a little texture in here. Let that dry. While that's drying, I'm going to come back and just add like this. Have a little smaller brush, just add a little texture down in here. Watercolor is meant to be fast too, I think. Well, you know, when you look at watercolor, there are some watercolors that are very realistic. You go to art fairs these days and you see some paintings in general, some very super realistic paintings, which are phenomenal, I always think. And then you see some that are so very abstract. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I like things to be looser, more fluid, and really kind of just your interpretation. It's your interpretation as an artist, as a painter, you know. Come around. Now this is drying up here. I was waiting this dries a little bit because sometimes when you first start out with the painting, you start a very fluid, very loose, very spontaneous. But then as you go along, it gets a little tighter. And I'm going to now pick up this. Actually, I'm going to put a little orange on my palette here. It's a little tiny bit of orange, which I'm putting it on my mixing tray. And don't have it in my palette. My palette is pretty simple in colors. Sometimes you see artists working with all kinds of colors and pigments. My palette is pretty simple. I basically have just primary colors, you know, the red, blue, and yellow, and then a couple of the earth tone colors like the browns, and basically a couple of secondary colors like the greens. But primarily it's the red, the blue, and the yellow that I work with. I kind of mix those colors, and you know, as we learned a long time ago, you can mix everything pretty much with those three primary colors. And that's pretty much what I stick with. It's called a split primary palette. And with those few colors, you can just paint anything and everything.
Is there a particular brand of paint that you prefer?
I really like Holbein Watercolor. It is a professional grade, and it stays moist longer in your palette. Doesn't dry out. It stays nice and fresh. Although eventually it'll dry out. But some of the other brands or whatever, what you want to do is stay away from the student grade. Go with the professional grade. It costs a little bit more, but they last longer, and they work better. I mean, you use less of them because they're more vibrant in color. So just add a little shadow in the eye area here. And then pick up the board a little bit sometimes. You pick up the board and then the water helps the pigment to blend together. That's the most important thing, letting the colors blend together. That's where the fun is at, just letting it go. Don't try to control it too much. Now that, I wait till that dries. I kind of move around while that's drying up there. I'm going to come over here into a different area. Sometimes you can use a hair dryer to speed it up, but I just kind of move around the painting, and it's kind of easier to do that. Rather than having the noisy hair dryer. Well, yeah, a good point. This is a 140-pound watercolor paper. Fabriano is a good, that's what it looks like anyway, Fabriano paper, and it's on a block, so it's sealed all the way around the edges so that it won't buckle. A lot of times, if you don't have it on a block, or if you don't stretch the paper, when you add water, the paper has a tendency to buckle and get a little wavy. So that's what you kind of avoid when you get a block. And here again, the paper is probably is very important because you don't want to get the cheaper student grade paper either. It's very frustrating if you do that. And I'm going to wait till that dries. Now I'm going to let me grab another brush here. Brush I don't use too often, but I think I'll just use it here to show you kind of a good application for it. It's a fan brush, kind of a nice, fun-looking fan brush here. Looks like that. Okay, it's really kind of a neat brush, and it's great. It's great for feathers, especially this particular case. Just put some feathers there. Got a nice feel to it. See a little.
What about your practice? Do you paint every day or?
You know what? Well, I'm teaching every week, so I have to prepare for the class. And what I'll do is I'll usually, for the class, I'll come up with a subject for the class and I'll paint that at home. And I paint probably maybe 4 or 5 times a week. You know, other things happen. You can't paint all the time. You know, you got grown-up things you have to do, you know. And so paint when you can. It's always, especially this time of year, it's really great to just, when you can, at least get outside. I'm gonna let this dry. Now I'm waiting, that's pretty dry. So people say that when you're painting animals, it's not until you put in the eyes of the animals, then it comes alive, you know, so it's kind of it's kind of true too. But you don't want to start with the small little features like if you're doing animals or even portraits of people, you don't want to start with the eyes and the nose right away. What you want to do is work with the big shapes and work down to the smaller areas. In this case, it'd be the eye. So I'm just going to pick up some blue here, pick up phthalo blue and a little burnt umber. And I don't have any black on my palette, so I make my own dark colors, phthalo blue, burnt umber, and you can come up with a really nice, dark, rich black, or just a dark blue-gray. Now this you have to take, you know, a little, even though I still have a big brush, notice I didn't grab a small little tiny detail brush. I picked up a big brush and I'm kind of doing this. And just using the point of this big brush. Around. Yep. I'm gonna let that dry a little bit. And come down. Yeah. Now I do have, and I did pick up a smaller brush now. You can see that, just kind of, when you really look at nature, I mean, really look at details of nature. You know, one time in class, we painted a fly. Some of the students, what are you painting a fly? But you really look at insects, fascinating up close. Really fun to look at and really learn to see as an artist.
There were a number of animals in your slideshow. Are animals a favorite subject of yours, or do you have a favorite subject?
Well, you know what? I like doing animals right now anyway, but there are, you know, I've painted, I mean, every subject you can think of, I really enjoy. Landscapes, seascapes, ships, you name it. Rural scenes, out in the country. I mean, there's all kinds of subjects. Even around the house, things laying around the house, you can paint. And you can basically just go get some vegetables and fruit and lay them out, paint them. Let that to dry there. Now I'm going to come back and I'm going to lift a little paint, pick up some paint. Well, yep, I'm moving to another section here and I'm pick up some paint in this area here. Now you can pick up paint too by just wetting the area and then taking a paper towel and then lifting the paint. So I'm wetting an area. And I'm kind of picking it up a little bit. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm kind of just following that on the area like that. All right, I'm going to let that dry just a little bit more.
I noticed that you work from light color to dark color in the eye. Is that the way watercolor typically?
Yeah, that's the way. In this particular case, I start out with basically the overall big shape of the light blues around it, and then the oranges, and the kind of the dark areas in here. Now, there is some light highlights in the eye, and I do have that. I've used some masking fluid to save the white. So once this is dry, I will be able to lift the masking fluid, and you'll be able to see the white highlights pop out of the eye. And another thing, I'm just reaching over here, and I'm going to grab an X-Acto knife somewhere. Okay, I'm back. And I'm just scratching out some little highlights that I see here and there.
You mentioned how people shouldn't be afraid to make mistakes with watercolors. Is this a way that you can make a correction?
Yeah, there's all kinds of ways to make a correction. You can scratch it out, but you can scratch out little things. You can't scratch out a whole lot, that's for sure. But more importantly is that whatever you put down, don't judge it. Don't judge your own work. We are our own worst critics as we're painting, especially as we're painting along. We think, oh my gosh, you put down a brush stroke and you think, oh my gosh, that's not right, and you think, oh, I'm gonna start over. Don't think that way. Don't judge it too much. Just keep moving forward and see what happens as you progress through the painting. And I'm pretty sure that if you stick with it, you will find out that, hey, it's not that bad. Especially when you look at it the next day too. Look at the next day and see what you think about it. So don't worry about anything. Don't worry about it being right or wrong. Because who's to say what's right or wrong, If it's not exactly right, I always say if these colors are not exactly right, I mean, I could change these colors all over and make them completely different. And that would be okay because it's my interpretation of it also, So, and then knowing when to stop, knowing, say, okay, that's enough. You don't want to overwork it. So what I'm going to do while that's drying, the eye's not complete yet, but what I am going to do is I'm picking up even a bigger brush now, a larger, bigger brush, and I'm going to pick up, mixing around all these colors over here that I have. Sometimes I like the colors that are happening over here on my palette. You get some really neat effects, really cool effects. I'm just kind of mixing up all the colors that I have here. And what am I going to get? I'm going to get like a gray. And one of the things people are worried about is mud. They always say, oh my gosh, it's too muddy. Well, it's not that bad. Mud is not bad as long as you control it, a little bit.
And your paper is dry. as you apply the pigment?
Yes, yeah, good point. That's a good question. Sometimes you want to, you'll wet the paper. But in this case, for this particular subject, I decided to go with dry, first of all, just to let the colors mix themselves.
And I notice you're moving your palette so that water moves away from your image that you've already created.
Oh, you mean like right now?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm kind of just pushing back and just kind of a loose, just nothing specific as far as, boom, look at that. Just let the water flow. Just let it go. Let it flow down. It's kind of fun to do. I mean, after a while, it's really kind of just like that goes that way. That kind of come down, boom, boom. That, bring this down. Reaching over here, I'm just grabbing, all these colors that are over here. I'm just going, come down, fluid. You just let it kind of. And then let these colors blend a little bit. There. And even over here, take another brush. I'm kind of getting to a point where you think, oh yeah, maybe I'll just stop here, I'm just going to stop here. Although, that's the thing when you're an artist and you're, especially with watercolor, like I mentioned before, knowing when to stop, but there's always one little thing that you see, think, I'm like, try, but in this case, I'm just going to let this, have to wait till that eye dries a little bit. And then what I'll do is, there's that, again, I mentioned that masking fluid. The masking fluid, I'll peel that off, and then you'll see the highlight of the eye in there. This is still kind of wet. Oh, this little case here? Oh, this little bamboo case. Yeah, it's kind of a neat little thing. It's really made out of bamboo. And the reason for that is that you can put your brushes in here when you clean. Take care of your brushes. That's most important. Take care of them. And slide them in here. And you can wrap it up. And it's very breathable. So you're not sealing off your wet brushes into a plastic case or a cloth case. It'll get wet because it could get little, it doesn't get any air, it gets a little moldy. So it's really kind of neat here to have this because the air gets in and it air dries that way. And you can actually make one of those too.
Are you removing that masking now?
Yeah,
What tool are you using?
Oh, this is basically, I'm taking the masking fluid off and I'm using a rubber cement pickup. Rubber cement pickup is very handy for just lifting the masking fluid and rubber cement or whatever. And you can actually use your finger too. But it's a great way to save the white of a paper. Rather than trying to paint around the whites, you put down the masking fluid and you save the white areas. And then you sometimes have to come back. It might be a little too bright, so you just kind of knock it down a little bit with a little color. Might look too stark, too white. And then one last thing, I'm going to, it just feels like it needs a little more texture because watercolor, or art in general, is all about contrast, smooth and rough, big and small, warm colors, cool colors. you name it. It's all about contrast. And this I just feel needs a little more texture. Okay. So I'm just going to pick up.
Walk through the steps of what you're doing right now because we can't see on camera.
Oh, okay. Over here, I'm adding the final touches, the final note, so to speak. I have a toothbrush, an old toothbrush here, and I'm picking up some color in the toothbrush. Now, you may not be able to see this. We'll see how this goes, but toothbrush, putting some color on the toothbrush, and then I'm just running my thumb across the bristles of the toothbrush to add a little texture overall. All right, so you may not, it's hard to see probably on the camera, but if I were to do this, let's see. I can pick this up. How does that? You see that? Okay. How's that look? I mean, you can, what's really kind of fun is when you really look up close and you kind of see some of the textured areas, you know, the areas I was talking about. Kind of a fun effect. So I'm going to say this is pretty close to, it's almost finished. Although, you know, maybe just one last thing. I promise you, one last thing. It might be just kind of in here a little bit. And then leave it at that.
When you sign your
How's
work,
that?
what do you sign in watercolor or do you use something else to sign?
No, watercolor, use a brush. Yep, yes, use a brush in watercolor for sure. And that is it. And then thank you, little parrot, for being a model today.